True freedom. True freedom is what God wants, again, His creation to experience. Yes. So why is it that some people are not experiencing true freedom? Yes. Well, I submit to us today that sometimes the challenges in this life can cause us to not experience true freedom. Yeah. But if you decide to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then you can experience a freedom that the world does not give. That's right. That's right. And so in our text, this 118th Psalm, what we find is a psalmist here, unnamed. There are some who believe that this was David, but many people say that it was not David. So we're going to just call him the psalmist. All right. Here is the psalmist. And he's here in a certain condition. Yes. We hear this psalmist really testimony. And he's talking about some things that he did. He's talking to us about what it really is to be free. He's in this situation. We don't really know what the circumstances are. All he says here is that out of his distress, he calls on the Lord. So we see the first freedom that this psalmist has, and that we have access to as well. What we see is that this psalmist was free to call the Lord. Free to call the Lord. Some people don't feel free to call the Lord. You see, although he was distressed, we don't know why. It could have been because of his friends. Sometimes friends can cause distress. It could have been because of his enemies. Sometimes enemies can cause distress. It could have been because of himself. Sometimes we need freedom from our own mind. We don't know exactly what his situation was, but he was free to call on the Lord. He practiced the freedom to call. He could have called on any other source. You know, I remember some years ago, I remember a lady on the television, and she would say, call Cleo if you need to talk about anything going on in your life. You just pick up the phone and call me there now. And people would call Cleo because they believe that Cleo could tell them where to go. Oh, yes, they do. So this psalmist could have called on another source. And I do know that there are those who call on other people, and they call on other gods, you see. But that's not who this psalmist called on. This psalmist had the freedom to call on the one true God who sent Jesus Christ to die for our sins. And what I like about this text is that it doesn't just say that the psalmist called on the Lord. It says that God answered the psalmist. God did not send the psalmist to the voicemail. All right. God did not answer the psalmist through a text message. All right. God did not use an emoji to respond to the psalmist. God did not even have an assistant to answer the call and tell the psalmist that he'll get back to him. You see, that's how God is. When we call out to God, God is always ready to hear our cry. So since we're free to call, this psalmist is showing us true freedom means that we have access to God. So we ought to participate or take advantage of the opportunities to call on the Lord. Because sometimes we can call on people and they will not answer. Sometimes we can't even depend on ourselves. Freedom to call on the Lord. Then the